In the history of Japanese baseball, there have been rivalries. There have been controversies. There have been moments of tension behind closed doors that occasionally leaked into the public. But what happened on NHK, on national television, in front of the entire country of Japan, was something nobody in the baseball world was prepared for. Manager Ibata sat down. Ohtani sat beside him. The cameras were rolling. And what followed was not a polished press conference with carefully rehearsed talking points. What followed was the kind of raw, unfiltered truth that people in professional sports almost never speak out loud, especially not on national television, especially not about a teammate. Murakami's true nature was exposed. Not through a leaked locker room story. Not through an anonymous source whispering to a journalist. But through the two most respected figures in Japanese baseball, the manager and the greatest player who has ever worn the Samurai Japan uniform, speaking clearly, calmly, and without hesitation. And then came the declaration that shook the entire Japanese baseball world to its foundation. Separation from the WBC. 10 Samurai Japan players. Gone. Not temporarily. Not conditionally. Permanently leaving the WBC and NPB structure that has defined Japanese baseball for generations. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, in the moment that has been replayed and screenshot and discussed more than any other, Murakami glared across the room and tore Ohtani's uniform. Not metaphorically. Not as an expression. He tore it. Japanese baseball has never seen anything like this. And today, we are going to take you inside every single moment of how this explosion happened, why it happened, and what it means for the future of Samurai Japan. To understand how this moment arrived, you have to understand the relationship between Murakami and the broader Samurai Japan structure, and why the tensions that erupted so publicly on NHK had actually been building for a very long time. Munetaka Murakami is one of the most talented hitters Japanese baseball has ever produced. His numbers in NPB are historic. His power, his bat speed, his ability to hit for both average and distance, these are gifts that come along once in a generation. Nobody disputes his talent. Nobody questions what he is capable of when everything is working. But talent and character are two different things. And the people closest to the Samurai Japan operation, the coaches, the support staff, the players who have shared a dugout and a locker room with Murakami, have quietly known for some time that behind the highlight reel, there was a personality that did not always align with the values that Samurai Japan is supposed to represent. The whispers started after the last WBC cycle. Small things, at first. Moments of friction that were smoothed over because winning covers a multitude of sins in professional sports. A comment here. An attitude there. The kind of behavior that teammates absorb in silence because speaking up feels like a bigger disruption than simply tolerating it. But silence has a limit. And when manager Ibata took over the Samurai Japan operation, he brought with him a philosophy that had very little tolerance for the kind of behavior that had been quietly excused before. Ibata is not a manager who separates performance from character. For him, they are the same thing. How you treat the people around you, how you conduct yourself when the cameras are off, how you represent the uniform you are wearing, these things matter as much as your batting average. Murakami and that philosophy were always going to collide. The only question was when. The breaking point did not arrive suddenly. It arrived through a series of incidents that gradually made it impossible for the situation to continue. Sources close to the Samurai Japan operation describe a pattern of behavior from Murakami that went far beyond ordinary locker room friction. The attitude toward younger players, the kind of mentorship and encouragement that the best veterans in any sport instinctively provide, was absent. The respect for the coaching staff that a national team environment demands was inconsistent at best. And then there was his relationship with Ohtani. Shohei Ohtani occupies a unique position in Japanese baseball. He is not simply the best player. He is the symbol. He is the standard against which everything in Samurai Japan is measured. When manager Ibata spoke to players about preparation, about diet, about daily routine, he pointed to Ohtani as the example. Not to pressure anyone. Not to demand that players become something they are not. But to show what is possible when talent is matched with discipline and character. Murakami did not receive that message the way it was intended. Whether it was jealousy or ego or simply a personality that does not respond well to comparison, the tension between Murakami and the Ohtani standard became increasingly visible to everyone around them. Small confrontations. Cold silences. The kind of atmosphere in a locker room that coaches feel before they can fully describe it, the low hum of something that is about to break. And then it broke. When manager Ibata and Ohtani appeared together on NHK, the Japanese public initially expected what these appearances usually deliver: warm stories about team chemistry, inspiring words about the upcoming competition, the kind of feel-good content that national broadcasters love to air before a major tournament. What they got instead was the truth. Ibata spoke first, and his words were measured but unmistakable. He did not use emotional language. He did not attack Murakami personally. He simply described, with the calm clarity of a man who has made a difficult decision and fully accepted it, the values that Samurai Japan must represent and the reality that not every player, regardless of their talent, can be part of an environment built on those values. The message was clear without being cruel. The standards are the standards. They apply to everyone equally. No batting title, no home run record, no individual achievement exempts a player from meeting them. And then Ohtani spoke. When Shohei Ohtani speaks publicly about something beyond baseball, people listen differently than they listen to anyone else. Not because he is louder or more dramatic. Exactly the opposite. Ohtani speaks quietly, thoughtfully, with the measured tone of someone who has carefully considered every word before saying it. And precisely because of that quality, when he says something direct, it lands with extraordinary weight. What Ohtani said on NHK about Murakami was not vague. It was not diplomatic softening around a difficult subject. It was the honest assessment of a man who has watched, firsthand, the gap between Murakami's public image and his private behavior, and who had decided that the gap was no longer something that could or should be protected. He exposed it. Calmly. Completely. The NHK studio went silent for a moment after Ohtani finished speaking. Not the comfortable silence of a well-received answer. The sharp, startled silence of a room processing something it did not expect to hear. The response from Murakami came quickly. Too quickly for anyone to intervene. When word reached him of what had been said on NHK, when he understood that Ibata and Ohtani had spoken publicly, on national television, about who he truly is, the composure that professional athletes are trained to maintain in public situations collapsed entirely. He glared. The witnesses who were present describe it not as the ordinary intense look of a competitive athlete but as something colder and more unsettling. The glare of a person who feels exposed and is choosing anger as his response to that exposure. And then he grabbed Ohtani's uniform and tore it. In the world of professional sports, where physical altercations between players are not exactly rare, this act still managed to shock everyone who witnessed it. Because this was not a heat-of-the-moment collision on the field. This was not the chaos of a bench-clearing brawl where emotions run away from everyone simultaneously. This was a deliberate act. A direct, personal violation directed at the man who had just told the truth about him on national television. Tearing Ohtani's uniform. The symbolism of that act, intentional or not, was not lost on anyone watching. Ohtani's uniform is not just fabric. In Japan, that uniform represents something enormous. It represents the standard. It represents the values that Ibata had been speaking about on NHK just hours before. To grab it and tear it was to reject everything that uniform stands for. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, the footage and descriptions of what Murakami had done were everywhere. Social media in Japan erupted. Baseball analysts who had spent years carefully avoiding direct criticism of Murakami's off-field behavior suddenly had no reason left to hold back. The true nature that Ibata and Ohtani had described on NHK had revealed itself in the most public and undeniable way possible. What followed was swift and, to many observers, inevitable. Manager Ibata convened the Samurai Japan leadership. The conversations that took place in those meetings were private, but the outcome was not. 10 players, 10 members of the NPB roster connected to the WBC structure, announced their permanent departure from both the WBC and NPB involvement. 10 players. Not a quiet resignation. Not a gradual fading away. A collective, coordinated, permanent separation. The baseball world in Japan struggled to process the scale of what was happening. The WBC has been one of the proudest chapters in Japanese baseball history. The 2006 championship. The 2009 championship. The 2023 championship with Ohtani on the mound for the final out. These are moments that defined an entire nation's relationship with the sport. And now 10 players were walking away from the structure that produced those moments. The reasons, as they emerged through statements and media reporting, pointed in one direction. The environment. The culture. The tolerance, for too long, by too many people, of behavior that contradicted everything Samurai Japan publicly claimed to stand for. The Murakami situation was not the cause of this departure. It was the final confirmation of a problem that had been growing for years. Ibata's response was characteristically direct. The departures were acknowledged. The reasons were not disputed. And the message to everyone remaining in the Samurai Japan structure was the same message he had delivered on NHK: the standards are the standards. They were not negotiable before. They are not negotiable now. The immediate question everyone is asking is simple: can Samurai Japan survive this? 10 players gone. A public scandal involving one of NPB's biggest stars. The most watched NHK baseball appearance in years, producing revelations that nobody in the comfortable world of Japanese baseball media was prepared for. But here is the perspective that gets lost in the chaos of the immediate reaction. Samurai Japan did not become the greatest national baseball team in the world by accident. It became great because of the standards. Because of the culture. Because of the insistence, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it required difficult decisions, that wearing that uniform means something beyond individual talent. Ibata removing Murakami and accepting the departure of 10 players is not the destruction of Samurai Japan. It is the defense of everything Samurai Japan is supposed to be. The players who remain know this. The younger players coming up through NPB who will fill the roster spots that have opened up, they know this too. The message sent by what happened on NHK, by what Ohtani said, by what Ibata decided, is louder and clearer than any motivational speech before any tournament game. Character counts here. The uniform means something. Either you live up to it or you don't belong in it. That is not a weakening of Samurai Japan. That is a reaffirmation of why it became great in the first place. Japanese baseball will be processing what happened on NHK for a long time. The image of Murakami tearing Ohtani's uniform will not fade quickly. The declarations of departure from 10 players will reshape the WBC roster conversation for the next cycle. The candidness of Ibata and Ohtani on national television, the willingness to say publicly what had been whispered privately for years, has permanently changed the way Japanese baseball talks about the gap between talent and character. But perhaps the most important thing to take from all of this is the simplest. Ohtani sat in that NHK studio and told the truth. Not because it was easy. Not because it was comfortable. Not because exposing a teammate's true nature is ever a pleasant thing to do, regardless of how justified it is. But because the truth, about who people really are, about what standards really mean, about what Samurai Japan is really supposed to represent, matters more than the discomfort of saying it. That is the Ohtani standard. Not just in performance. In everything. And on that day, in that studio, with the cameras rolling and the whole of Japan watching, that standard was exactly what separated the people who belong in that uniform from the person who just tore it.